Michael Gomez, and I'm a real estate broker and an investor here in Nashville, Tennessee.
And I'm Seth Mosley, Grammy Award-winning songwriter and real estate investor.
We host a monthly meetup in Middle Tennessee for anyone who wants to build passive income, not only for retirement, but for today.
On the first Wednesday of every month, we bring in an expert from every area of investing to help you with things like finding deals, getting your financing locked in, asset protection, every kind of investing, so much more.
Our videos are all about delivering that content to you.
Go to musicandmoneyig.com for more info on our free monthly events. Hit subscribe on the page so you don't miss any awesome content, and hit that like button if you like it.
Don't let all the flair of my jacket distract you.
Here's the content.
Thank you for the warm welcome, you guys. And as Seth said, I'm from a little island on the west coast of Canada, basically as west coast as you can get. A little louder. Woo! All right. I'll lose my voice by the end of this, but it'll be worth it. All right. So I am here to tell you about the book. It's called The Year of Less, and it's about an experiment I did where I didn't buy anything for a year, and just sort of some of the lessons I learned around that. But I can't tell you that story until I tell you a bit about my past that kind of led up to me deciding to take on that challenge. So when I was 25 years old, I was maxed out with almost $30,000 of debt. And it wasn't student loan debt. Like, the majority of that was just straight up consumer debt. I had always been someone who spent more than I earned. I basically thought that as long as I could afford the minimum payment, I would be fine. And like, honestly, in some ways, you are fine for a little while, and then there gets to a point where you're not fine. The unfortunate part of that, as my dad would probably say, is that I actually grew up in a house where we talked about money all of the time. When I was in high school, my dad used to do this thing where he would cut out articles from newspapers that were about like retirement plans, things that were going on in the housing market or just in the Canadian economy. I'm like 14, 15 years old, and my dad would leave these things on my bed for me to read when I got home from school. And then at dinner every night, "Oh, Cait, did you read that article?" And you're like, yeah, sure did. I never read them. But in saying that, I mean, the lesson still, I would say, is if you have kids, talk to your kids about money all the time, or as honestly as you're willing to be, because I honestly don't think that I would be where I am today if I didn't at least have that relationship. So I still made a lot of mistakes, but I don't think I would be anywhere where I am right now if I didn't grow up with a dad who at least talked to me about it, even if I never, ever wanted to hear it. So I was maxed out with almost $30,000 of debt at 25. I'm 33 now, just for reference. And at the time, because I was maxed out, I was incredibly hard on myself. Like, the stories I used to tell myself then were that I was a failure. I had kind of screwed up any chance I was going to have of having a strong financial future. And really, because, it was mostly bad spending decisions or just poor budgeting tactics, like, I truly just knew realistically it was my fault. But I was really, really hard on myself. Getting to the point where I was maxed out, I literally only had $100 left in my checking account and $100 left on one of my credit cards. And I had to somehow make that last me for 6 weeks. We could talk about how I did that another time, but that is where I started with. So that was June 2011. Because I started with such a negative mindset and I was so hard on myself, I then spent the next 2 years being incredibly aggressive about my debt repayment approach. So I can tell you a number, like during those 2 years, I had months where I put up to 55% of my income towards debt, which like sounds nice in theory that you're maybe able to put more than 50% of your income towards something, but it was such a stretch for me that I was never letting myself have any kind of life. So I like barely let myself go out with friends. I didn't let myself even do things like have coffee that much or just anything. I had no entertainment budget, and everything was going towards debt. Like anything possible that I had was going towards debt. So I also will say the positive side is that once I started making major progress on paying off my debt, I did realize that there were other things in my life that I could probably change. Probably the most positive was that actually only about About a year and a half into my debt repayment, I decided to quit drinking. I'm pretty open in the book about this, but I started drinking when I was 12 years old, and I quit when I was 27. And I can say now, of course, that I think that quitting drinking is something that has helped me make a lot of intentional decisions about how I want to live my life today. But it was hard back then. So in those 2 years, I made some pretty incredible changes. I paid off all of my debt, and I quit drinking. But as soon as I finished paying it off, I basically went right back to spending almost everything. So compared to the months where I was putting like up to 55% of my income towards debt, I would maybe save 5%, 7%, like 10%. And at the time, I should say, I used to share all of these things, like all these numbers very honestly on a blog that was unfortunately called Blonde on a Budget. And so I would be very honest though, and like at the beginning of the month, kind of show people my numbers and say, here's my plan to save 20%. I kept having this idea in my head, like I wanted to save 20%. And so I'd like, here's my plan, here's my numbers, I'm gonna save 20%. And just kind of for retirement, like I didn't really have a plan for that money. But here's what I'm gonna do, guys. And then at the end of every month, I would have to, unfortunately, almost shy away from it, but say, okay, so like here are my updated numbers. I saved 4%, and here's why I'm gonna justify it. Writing those blog posts never felt good, and not just because I had to tell a bunch of people what I was doing, but they didn't feel good for me. I knew that I could do better, but there just still wasn't anything inside of me telling me why. Like I had no real goals for my savings. I didn't know what I was working towards. So this imaginary idea of saving 20% of my income, I think like compared to debt, which is so obvious, you're like, okay, here's a plan, here's a number, I'm gonna wipe it out, and then we're gonna get to the end. I had no goals for this 20%, so there was no motivation or like reason behind why I would actually do it. So I would, write these posts every single month for 12 months in a row. And I mean, after 12 months of saying, hey guys, I can't do this thing, my self-esteem was just really high. So again, because I grew up in a family where we talked about money all the time, it was June of 2014. So I'm 2 years debt-free, should be feeling pretty good. Sitting around in the yard with my whole family, so my mom and dad, my brother and sister. And again, we're talking about money. My sister, I'm 29 at this point, my sister was 20. She makes this comment about how she's just bought something that was like $500. And because we just talk about it openly, we're kind of teasing her a little, just like, did you really need to spend $500? Like, you're in university, yeah, you're working a bit, but like, should you really have spent that money? And she goes, yeah, but like I save 20% of my income so I can do whatever I want with the rest. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, I don't know if I should ask my 20-year-old sister for financial advice, but what was weird is I think because I'm her older sister, the words that came out of my mouth next were, yeah, but you live at home. Like, do you really need 80% of your income, or could you live on less? And then it was one of those moments where like, I don't know what anybody else said after that. And I'm just sitting there going, why have I never asked myself that question? Like, why have I never said, do I need 90 or 95% of my income? Or could I be living on less than that? And so from there, like this idea just started turning, like, what if I kind of swapped the financial equation? Like, so much financial advice that's out there is like, here's how to save 10% for this and 20% for that. And it was the first time I'd kind of thought, what if we swapped it? And it was like, what if you could live on as little as possible? Like, what could you do with all the money that's left over? So 2 weeks later, I announced randomly on my blog that I was just going to do this experiment where I didn't buy anything for a whole year. I will say I was very naive, I think, when I got started. I was just like, this will be easy. I could do that. No problem. And also because, and kind of with any financial challenge you're setting for yourself, I was setting those rules based on very realistic numbers, right? Like, I'd been tracking my spending for 3 years. I did know kind of where I could cut back, what kind of things weren't that important to me. And so I wrote these 3 lists for myself. The first was the things I was allowed to buy. So in saying like you can't buy things, like please still buy groceries and put gas in your car when you need to get somewhere. And like when you run out of toiletries, like I'm always like, if you run out of deodorant and toothpaste, like everyone in your life wants you to buy more of those things. So go right on ahead and buy things like as you're running out of them, the things you actually use. So I was like, okay, this seems easy. the list of things I couldn't buy was very, very long. Clothes, shoes, accessories, cosmetics, books, magazines, electronics, things for around the house. Again, just this idea, like, unless some reason came up where, yes, I actually really needed to buy something, it was completely off limits. And then I also wrote, because I was doing it for a year, I could kind of look ahead and like look at a calendar and see a few things that were coming up that I would probably need to buy something for. Like I had 5 weddings to attend that year. Can I just say I'm so glad to not be in my 20s anymore, where you have a wedding like every weekend. So I had 5 weddings to attend. I'm not really someone who dresses up, so I was like, I'm going to need some kind of outfit. I'm going to wear it to all of the weddings. So I knew I needed that. I needed some winter boots, kind of just basic things. And I had also set this challenge for myself that if I could save the money for it, I wanted to be able to buy myself a new bed. I still think it's interesting now, looking back at my spending habits. I used to have a really hard time buying things that cost a lot of money, because even when I had money or had credit and was just putting everything on credit, I was always afraid of big purchases. Like, it felt too scary and like I shouldn't, or I couldn't justify it, or I would never have the money for that. And yet I had absolutely no problem spending like $50 at Starbucks every single week. So, which very quickly adds up to a lot of money. So I set this out, got started. I would say that things were pretty easy in the first few months. The hardest part was probably just changing habits. And people have asked, like, what was the hardest thing to give up? And the answer, or for me, is sort of silly, but it was like, well, takeout coffee, which was something I put on my list only because I wasn't comfortable with how much I was spending on it. So takeout coffee and books. That answer would be different for everybody, though. Like, the reason that those 2 things were hard for me was because I had habits around buying them almost every day or every week, right? So like every single day, instead of going for a takeout coffee, you're met with this challenge of, oh, okay, I don't get to do that. Okay, what do I do now? And like having to just change a habit that was so ingrained in my system. The books were the same thing. I was the kind of person before who, anytime I heard about a book, I would immediately add it to whatever online shopping cart had it cheapest. They all had the like, get it up to $25 and you get free shipping. I would just like add a second book that sounded remotely interesting, and 2 books would show up at my house probably every week. And I would love to tell you that as a writer, I read 2 books a week, but that is not true. So I ended up with like stacks and stacks, or just shelves and shelves full of books that I never read. I also decided in all of this that I was going to declutter and just get rid of a bunch of stuff. And the reason for that, it wasn't financial, obviously. I would say that it actually sounds really counterintuitive when you're like, oh, I'm not going to shop for anything, and I'm going to get rid of almost everything I own. Like, that doesn't sound like it adds up. But I had moved 5 times the year before this, and when you move that many times, you see how many times you basically just pick up a box, remove it from a closet, put it in a vehicle, move it, and just put it in another closet, and you never open it up and look at what's inside. And I sort of probably just had this mentality, like, because you own it forever. But yeah, so I could see, like, after so many moves, like, there was so much stuff that I wasn't using. There was also a lot of stuff that, as I decluttered, 2 things. Like, one, I realized I, at one point, had probably bought for the wrong version of myself. I don't think most people do this consciously. I don't think you walk up to an item and you're like, that's going to be like an outfit for the more professional version of myself. It's not that obvious. But I used to place a lot of value on things before I would buy them, just kind of thinking like, oh, that is going to be the thing I should wear at this kind of event, even though these kinds of events were things I never went to. But it was just like, well, these are like things that we're supposed to own, or like that's just a thing that I also used to buy a lot of like projects, like creative projects. Like I would buy expensive cameras or things for painting or scrapbooking, just thinking that those were things I would like to do. But I never stopped to ask myself, first of all, when I was actually going to set the time to do those things, but if I actually even wanted to. And so the other part of it is that when you've moved that many times and you really look around at all your stuff, you start to realize how bad it feels when you're looking in all the corners of your home and there's all this stuff that you're not using and you know you've spent a lot of money on at one point. So as I started decluttering, I just noticed like I started feeling a lot lighter, like I was actually doing the things I wanted to do, which was none of these creative projects, and I basically just read a lot of books, which was what I had actually wanted to do. But even things like books, like I used to buy books for kind of the smarter or more interesting version of myself. Like I would buy books thinking I wish I was the kind of person who read the classics. I am just not, and that is okay. But it took almost that whole year for me to get to that place of being like, okay, like I'm just going to accept myself. I'm the person who I read personal finance books and I read chick lit, and that's just going to be the way that it is. So there's probably a bunch of little things I could say about the challenge or like other hard parts, but overall I would say that I got to the end of that year, especially with the decluttering, like finally understanding myself for the first time. Like I think really understanding who I was and what I wanted in this life. Numbers wise, the stuff that might be most interesting is that I got to the end of that year and I had lived on just 51% of my income. I saved 31%. And I also spent 18% on travel. Now, travel was something that I had wanted to do since I was 18 years old. I sort of grew up in a family in just like a town where, especially being from an island, like, I mean, all towns kind of have their stories, but being from an island, you're sort of just told that you do live in paradise, and like, why would you want to go anywhere else? But I did. Like, I'd always wanted to travel, and because I'd always been in debt, I'd never had the money to. And because, like I said, I was always really bad about putting big expenses on credit. Like, I guess I'm grateful for that now, but I wanted to travel that year. So for the first time, I started putting money towards things that I actually cared about and I was really enjoying, and saved 31% of my income overall. I also decluttered, just for anyone's curious. I got rid of 70% of my belongings that year, and now I would say it's probably more like 85%. I only have a few boxes full of things right now. I basically have no furniture, and at the moment, actually just at the end of last year, I gave up my apartment, and I'm just sort of traveling full time, which is honestly really scary, and like it's probably one of the scarier decisions I've made in the last few years. But it continues to be I continue to kind of face these moments where, like, as I'm kind of walking down the path of what feels right for me, I'm coming up with like crossroads where you have to make a decision of like, am I going to kind of keep doing what I should be doing, or am I going to do what's right for me? And at the moment, even if it feels a little crazy, it still feels right for me. So yeah, there's probably more I could say, but I love Q&A if anyone wants to like chat about this. So yeah.
What made you decide to write a book? Obviously you're a writer, and how do your parents feel about your turning a negative into a positive and being a big success?
Yeah, so a couple things in there. I would say my parents are very proud. I remember, like, I didn't tell my parents about my debt until I'd paid off more than half of it. And because something happened, like when I was writing about this, even though I was on my blog in the beginning, I was anonymous. I was just like blonde on a budget. Again, not surprising, I didn't want anyone in my life to know how much debt I had. But when I'd paid off a bit more than half of it, I started getting a lot of freelance work. So I started getting emails from different financial startups. Also because like in Canada, it's a much smaller market. But I started getting a lot of emails from different financial startups that we had just saying like, would you want to write a blog post for us? And that stuff felt really cool, and I wanted to share it with my parents, and then just felt like, well, I'm gonna have to tell them about all the rest of this. But I remember when I told my mom first, the first thing she said was like, you had how much debt? And then she said, okay, but how much have you paid off? And I told her, and she goes, well, Cait, you have to tell people how you did that. And I said, well, actually, I do on the internet. So that was kind of neat. And ever since, like, they've just been incredibly supportive. My mom used to be the kind of person, like, every blog post, as soon as it went live, she was always up at like 4:35 in the morning. She would read it and like email me if there were any typos. So they've been really, really supportive. The book came about in a really weird way, and not that I would have ever expected it. When I finished the shopping ban, I did an interview with someone for the Forbes website. And it was just basics, the numbers, the challenges, you know, how everything kind of came out. And the morning it came out, she sent me an email and just said, just FYI, these things have a tendency to go viral. I didn't know what that meant, but I think what it meant was I got contacted by 6 different literary agents in the next 2 weeks. And it just sort of became an option. Yeah, it's been interesting though. So it just came out last January. I mean, the shopping ban ended in June of 2015. So books take a long time. Like traditional book publishing takes a long time. But yeah, it's been pretty neat. So Anything else? Money stuff. Yeah, seriously, anything.
How much time did you spend
Writing the book. I think because the way that I went, so doing a non-fiction book, going the traditional publishing route, if you can work with an agent, what you end up doing is just writing a book proposal first, and then they pitch the idea to publishers. So the book proposal, though, is like 40 or 45 pages, and you don't even write the book. Like, I think maybe 2,000 words of it was actually in the book. So it's almost like writing a master's thesis. Like, you write this huge document just outlining what it's going to include. And then, yeah, she pitched it to publishers. The proposal process probably took us 2 months of back and forth because it was my first time doing one, so it's very confusing. I've just never written anything like that before. And then the book itself, I would say, like part-time for 6 months, but like really seriously for 2 or so. Where that was like all I did, and I sort of just isolated myself, and it was neat. It was a interesting experience, but yes.
It sounds like the process of writing a book is more of a path of self-discovery than anything. Journal as well. I know it's a lot of writing, but do you journal?
I do journal. I mean, honestly, my blog used to just be like my journal public. I was very honest for a long time on the blog. Like, I shared everything. My friend Cait's here from Canada as well, and she can probably attest, like, just the old posts, I was very honest. So yeah, but I mean, I think that in itself, like, writing, you're constantly making 2 points come together, like figuring out how you got from A to B, and yeah, now I do it more privately. So.
How did you overcome a constant barrage of consumerism? I imagine it's the same in Canada as it here in the States. Just turn off the TV, stop reading the newspaper, what?
Yeah. Okay, I'm really glad you asked that because, like, there's a lot in that. How did I overcome the consumerism? So right when I started the challenge, one of the first things that I did was I unsubscribed from all newsletters that came to my email. You don't realize, like, how many store emails you sign up for, even just for something. You walk in to buy one shirt and then they email you for the next 4 years to try and get you to come back. So I unsubscribed from all of those. I sort of unfollowed all retailers on social media. And that was a weird one too. I think that there was, like, we've been talking a little bit about the identity part of it, where I used to buy things for this kind of other version of myself. But I sometimes think I used to follow certain brands that, even like today, I still really love what they're doing, but you like follow it because you feel like you should. It's like, oh yeah, like I really identify with that, so I need to follow and like see everything that they're doing. But like if you follow a brand, like a retailer on social media, the only thing you're going to see are more things that you can buy and sales all the time. And I also want to say in all of this, I don't know if it's explicit in the book, but it's been a big thing I've been talking about since the book came out. Like, I never ever want to say that buying stuff is bad. I buy stuff. Like, I still buy things when I need it, right? Like, but now I'm at a place where I have to have felt a genuine need for it. So even now, like, I don't do it very often, but since we've actually been in Nashville, like, we'll pop in and out of stores and stuff like that. But I'm not tempted by anything because I haven't felt a need for those items, right? So I'm not browsing being like, oh, maybe, like you walk in and you're like, maybe I'll buy something. Like, all of that is just gone now, like, unless I have felt a need for it. And felt a need can be as simple as, like, you've been noticing that your jacket, like I'm from the West Coast, which is known as the wet coast. Like, my rain jacket is starting to go. So I have, like, on my shoulder, it will get wet now. Like, my clothes will get wet if it rains a lot. So I'm like, okay, I need a new rain jacket now. Like, that is an actual need. Also too, actually, in things like moving, I moved 2 years ago, and some people, and because past me did this, like, you buy a bunch of things for the place that you're moving into before you've actually really lived there. Like, now it's things like, no, I actually lived there for 2-3 months. You can figure out what the space needs. Like, I would never in my life normally buy something like a coat rack, but in that place, because the front closet was so awkward to open, like, if you opened it, it hit a wall and put a mark on the wall. I was like, nope, this closet is storage. Like, I will not be opening this every day. So I bought a coat rack, but I would never normally do that. So yeah, just stuff like that. But I do still, I don't know. Social media is probably a big one. And yeah, the newsletters. Yeah, in the back.
Okay, thank you for your time, by the way.
Of course. Thank you.
How was your process in designing the book cover? Because I know that's a lot of stress for a lot of authors, especially when you're talking about the size of the spine and hummingbirds and how they count. Can you walk us through that process of just discovery and creation of the book cover?
Yeah, okay, so I'll just say, like, on the cover itself, I had no control over it, and I feel very grateful for what they came up with, because when you go the traditional publishing route, it is not up to you, and they could have given me something awful, and I would have just cried because they would not change anything. So I felt very, very lucky with mine. They had also set out things like the word count, so they told me to only write 50,000 words. I wrote 60. They still cut a little bit. But I mean, most books, depends on the topic, but like most are probably 60 to 80, kind of the average book. But yeah, so some of it was just kind of set out by them. So I don't know if I have the best answers. I mean, I know designers who now, like if I was to do one without a publisher, I know designers I would work with. So I think, and for stuff like that, it's really knowing like your aesthetic and like just trusting that you have to do what feels right. I just really, really lucked out. So.
Well, that's good. I didn't know they design that themselves. So would you say that going, sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Would you say that paying for a publisher versus doing self-publishing, what would you prefer as a now experience?
It's a good question. I mean, like when you work with a publisher, they pay you, but it's based on things like knowing you have an existing audience, like you have people who will probably buy some copies. I had a lot of distribution issues with my publisher. Like I would say that every publisher out there is going to have their quirks, and everyone I've spoken to who has published a book has had some kind of issue with theirs. So I had a lot of distribution issues. Like it came out in January of 2018. You couldn't find it in Canada till like the middle of March almost. Or like if there was the odd copy at a store here and there, but just stuff like that was hard. But also if I went self-publishing route, I'm like, I don't actually know how you get it in a bookstore. That route. So yeah, I all around. Also on the cover thing too, the only input they did let me have was asking what I hated and like absolutely did not want. So I was like, I don't want it to be pink or purple or look like it has anything to do with shopping. Perfect. And they did good. So yes.
How did you handle gift giving during that year of your life?
Yeah, good one. Okay, so gifts, still buying. Like, I will say though, like the shopping ban was all about me. So I was like, it's not about other people. And two, on that note, it's like, I'm not someone who goes around saying like, again, never buy anything ever again, or it's not about spending zero money. It is about using your money in a way that feels like it's in alignment with your goals, your values. So gift giving on the table for sure. So like I had 5 weddings, right? Christmas, I will say my family was pretty on board. Like we all talked about it and we're kind of on board with the idea of not doing much because we're all grown adults and we don't have kids or anything yet. So it was kind of like, we don't really need to do anything, and none of us really had any wants that Christmas, so we were kind of fine to not do much. But I had weddings and stuff that year. What I will say about stuff like that is that I got better about asking really honest questions to my friends. So my friends who were getting married, it's like, okay, looking at your wedding registry, like I could just buy anything on here. Like, is there anything you're really needing or really excited about? Like you really, really want it or need it for some reason? And if that was in my budget, then like buying that thing. Because a lot of times people just create huge registries, but you might not actually need a bunch of it. Then you end up getting a bunch of the stuff that you didn't want instead of the stuff you did want. So, yeah. Yes?
During that year of not buying, how often did you evaluate where you were in the process?
Every month. On the blog, sometimes it was every 2 months. But for myself, like I was still budgeting every month, so I knew like what I was spending each month. That's also, that year was when I, not surprising because of the question I posed to my sister, I started looking at my percentages more than anything. So I watched my percentages fluctuate and started to understand, like, rather than when we budget and we look at these exact dollars and cents and you're like, oh, like last month's so different than this month and you might feel bad about it. Like looking at percentages, you can just see like throughout a year, things do fluctuate, but at the end, you come out where you wanted. So every month though. Was there a question over here? Yeah. Well, I'm like, stay tuned. No, so my dad and I, my dad is also someone who's pretty nomadic, but that's the kind of work he has. So he'll be home for like 4 or 6 weeks, and then he's gone for like 6 weeks. So my dad and I just sort of arranged, like, I pay him still like a normal amount of rent. Like, I'm not a grown-up who's paying $0 to my dad. So I pay my dad a normal amount of rent for any month I'm with him. So I'm sort of treating my hometown as like, that's my base. I think I'll only be there like 2-3 months a year. Then my plan, like for like the holidays, like this is my plan for 2019 anyways, is like be there for maybe December, January, February. And then I'm just going to travel but book Airbnbs for like a month at a time, because if you do it for 28 days or more, you get significant discounts. And like I live in one of the most expensive areas of Canada. So I was like, as long as I can make it so that my costs are either the same or slightly lower, to me it's worth trying. So I'm sort of taking 2019 as an experiment. We'll see. Yes. Yeah.
I had a comment more than a question. I have read the book, and I just wanted to say one of the most encouraging things from you was that you told about real life, your mistakes, your challenges, the things you messed up. It was so real, and most books of this type that I've read have been more someone who had it all together, and here's how you're going to do it, and it never made it feel achievable. Your book was just so honest and real, and I right away jumped into it. Like I said, last month I did a spend-free month, and it was fantastic. And I'm on track with all my finances. I'm 60 years old, and I'm retired, living in Franklin, Tennessee, which is a feat on its own. But that was just a great thing I loved about the book, was your honesty, and that with all the things that we all have to deal with in life, you're still able to do this. And I love the way you wrote the book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think probably also a little bit of what she's speaking to is, like I said, I'm very open about the drinking sort of aspect. I mean, I think by the end of that year, something I really understood about myself is that the way I consume anything is probably the way I consume everything, which is that I binge. So I've never actually felt like I had an addiction to anything. Like even quitting drinking, for me, it wasn't that I had like a chemical addiction to it and needed to go through rehab. It was that I was a constant binge drinker, and it was like, this is not working for me anymore, and I need to figure something else out. So yeah, and like even binge eating or binge watching television or just anything, like I would go on a real deep dive, not like watching 4 episodes. Like if I was binging television, like I would spend days where I just didn't really do much, and that's just who I was. So I'm glad it was relatable. Thank you so much. Yes.
How did you reduce your food costs, clothing costs, and your entertainment? Give a couple of specific examples, like did you shop at thrift stores, cook at home more?
Well, I didn't shop at all. So clothes, I mean, I think that whole year I might have bought, I know I needed a sweater, I needed the outfit for the weddings. I just didn't buy a lot. Same with the bed. I did buy a new bed, which was really nice. But yeah, it was definitely, I would go on for sales, but still looking at quality versus just it being the cheapest. With groceries, I don't know what it's like down here, but like when I started my blog in 2011, I used to be able to spend $200 a month on groceries. That is not real life anymore. So it's been really hard. Like I don't eat meat, so that does help naturally. I've also always found that it's cheaper if you buy around the perimeter of a grocery store rather than what's in the middle. So everything that's in the middle is processed and is typically more expensive, right? So if you are looking at like produce, dairy, meat, and maybe the bakery if there's anything you need there, that kind of stuff. But I don't know, I'm pretty comfortable with all of that spending, knowing that there's not a ton more I can do. Like as this has progressed, I'd say things keep changing just ever so slightly, and I never put like the expert hat on, and I'm like, I'm really great at this, but like I look at like how I can reduce my waste now. So like if there's things I can cook more rather than anything that would maybe come in plastic, and it's like it's not about being perfect, just like making little shifts here and there where I'm doing a little bit better. So yeah. Yes.
Pertaining to your entertainment part of
Yes, sorry.
your social life, did you share with your friends? I know you waited until
That is a really good question, and I'm sorry I didn't address it sooner, so I'm really glad you asked. So it's one of the hardest questions to answer, only because it's really honest, is that because it was public on the blog, everybody knew. So any of my friends who might have looked at the blog occasionally, they knew what was going on. A lot were very confused. So I would have more situations where friends would like go out for dinner and then later would tell me about it, or I would just find out, and I'm like, well, why didn't you invite me? They're like, oh, I just thought you weren't spending money. I'm like, no, I could have gone to that. So it was more confusing at first. I can't say like I lost friends, but friendships shifted. So there might have been people who I would have gone and spent, not like gone a lot of shopping with, but maybe once a year we would go to like an outlet mall, or there was something like that, or just like let's go wander around here or there. Things like that shifted. But for me, as long as the friendship was important, what I just did was ask them to do different things. So I was like, how about we go for a walk or a hike, or do you want to come over and we'll make a meal, or like we can have coffee here at my house, or like tea at your house, rather than going out. So I did let myself still go to restaurants occasionally. I think my restaurant budget was like $100 or so a month. But again, it's really easy to spend way more than that, right? So I'd still go out maybe like once a week. I found I started going for like breakfast or brunch more often because it's a lot cheaper than other meals. So it's just, things shifted. But as the challenge went on, it was like, I didn't feel like I was losing anything, right? Like I still got to spend time with the people who mattered to me, and that was all I cared about. The reality is that I think quitting drinking taught me this more than anything. Like when you're going to change your life, you probably will lose friends, and that's hard. Like it's never an easy thing to navigate. But I can also say on the other side of that you meet a lot of incredible new friends who are like very intentional, care a lot about like what it means to like build a relationship, rather than one that's like just on drinking or just on shopping, like having an actual real relationship with someone. So, but it's a hard answer because in the beginning, people would always ask this, and I'm like, oh no, everything was fine. And then I was like, why doesn't it feel good to say that? Like, oh, because like that's not the full story. So, yeah. Anything else?
You mentioned that you, at this point, got, I think it's 85% of like everything you own.
Yep.
Can you just talk about that process? How did you go about that? That's amazing.
So in the beginning, I will say, I think some of it was really easy because, like I said, I had boxes of stuff I just kept moving around, and I never used any of it. So I remember like opening them up, and I'm like, oh yeah, never used any of these random things. They can go. It got harder as the year went on, and I found there were, like I was saying, like there were items I had bought for this kind of more aspirational version of myself, and I had to accept that I was probably not going to be that person. Now it's, to be honest, like it's just really easy, especially because I've really figured out what I value. Like I live in up until 2 months ago, I was living in a space where it had everything I required. So we have a mutual friend who came over to my house, and she stayed at it when I was traveling a little bit last year. And she was like, I honestly opened your closets to be like, she has more somewhere, right? I'm like, no, but I have everything I need. Like, I think I've truly figured out like what I need on a daily basis. And actually, I should have maybe said this, but like when the first year ended, I actually did it for a second year. But the second year I did something that was very boring, but has really informed my shopping habits, is that I did track everything I actually bought. So this is not important information, but like I know how many tubes of toothpaste I use in a year, and like how many sticks of deodorant, and that's not something to like write home about and be like, guess what, Mom? I use 5 sticks of deodorant on average. Like no one needs to know that information, but it stops me now from ever thinking like, oh, I might need more things. Like as long as I have half a stick of deodorant, I'm like, oh, I'm good for like weeks. Like I'm good to go. So it just taught me so much about like me as an average consumer, like who I am. Like I don't need that much. So as long as I'm covering my daily basic needs, then like I'm pretty good. And then the more I like decluttering, even like this past move, I didn't have very much to get rid of, but it was easy because it's just like, well, I don't use those things, and I'm definitely not going to need them while I'm traveling. So, yeah. It just sounds so ridiculous, but all the books I had bought for that other reader. Like, and again, that would be really different for everyone, but like having shelves and shelves full of books for like this imaginary, smarter, more interesting reader that I thought I should be, or like I for some reason wanted to be the kind of person who read those books. Yeah, that would be different for everyone, but for me, it was those. It was hard to give those up. Yeah. Oh, I also keep personal things, I will just say. Like, I don't have a lot. I have, like, one of those, like U-Haul size boxes, like one of the small ones. So it's, like, I don't know, 1 feet by 1.5 or 2 feet. Like, it's tiny. But I have sentimental things. Like, there are people who are like, oh, just take pictures of all your pictures and put them in the cloud. I'm like, heck to the no. Like, I look at my yearbooks once every couple of years, and I laugh, and that brings me joy. So, like, no one's taking away my high school yearbooks. So, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on what he was asking about anxiety and stress and happiness at these different phases. So you're $30,000 negative, you are living with less, doing no shopping, and then here you are. So I want you to talk about that.
Yeah.
And you're about to embark on this new journey of staying in short-term rentals. We have a lot of short-term rental owners here in this group, and I know when I go to one of mine and stay there overnight, it's so stress-free. I have virtually nothing there that's mine. I think we all wear the same 3 T-shirts on top of the
Yes,
pile.
I agree.
Yep. So can you talk about your emotional state throughout those steps and what you've learned from that, not only financially, but about happiness?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that. Like, you never know how much you want to talk about mental health stuff, but I've been more honest over the last few years about mental health. So I would say it's not surprising that when I was maxed out with debt, I was in a really bad place. Like, I used to cry myself to sleep at night. When I had $100 left to my name, I asked my parents if I could come back home for a few months just to get my feet on the ground, pay off a couple $1,000, and just try and like get a little bit of money so I had like headway and could keep going. And my parents said, sure, but like there's no room, so you can put your mattress on the floor in this like little cold room in the basement. And so that was my reality. Like, it was incredible that they let me be at home for a few months, but that was awful, and like it didn't add to feeling really great about it. So it was really hard when I was paying off my debt. I also used to do things like, I was writing anonymously. I didn't talk to my friends about my debt. So back then, I used to lie to my friends. Like, if they would ask me to hang out, I was actually doing some schooling. Like, I was finishing my degree. And I would just be like, oh, I just have homework. And I would say I had homework all the time, but I didn't, right? I was just, like, I didn't want to tell anyone what was really going on. So it was really hard when I was paying off my debt. And then I think the first year of being debt-free and I'm just kind of spending everything, I think that was a little bit of making up for that. It's like because I was too far to one side, so then I just went too far to the other side of spending again. During the shopping ban, I went through ups and downs for kind of different reasons. So in the book, I talk about, I found out my parents were getting divorced that year. And as an adult child, I will just say that I never thought it would be that hard as an adult. But I grew up in a house where we didn't expect it. So it was very surprising. So like had to grieve kind of the family that I had and all those things. So that year was hard on its own. Like, I don't think the shopping ban would have been that hard, except for just dealing with other things. But now I'm at a place where I've learned a lot, especially the more I travel. I've learned a lot about my own anxiety and kind of the boundaries I have to create so that I feel comfortable. Right? And like, I know what my systems of support are at all angles. And that's been the most important. That's also one of the reasons why I will rent places for like a month at a time. If I'm on the move too quickly, like if I'm in a new place every week or every few days, my anxiety skyrockets. Even though like I don't need a lot and I'm comfortable in a lot of places, but I need like a bit of a home base feeling. Like, it's okay if it's not my home and it's okay if I'm still exploring somewhere new, but I need a little bit of something that feels like comfortable, like safe. If I know my coffee shop and my grocery store, like little things like that. And so it's like I'm still able to live the life I want, but creating systems that make it okay for me. So I've been so unsure of even how to talk about travel because I'm like, I never want to paint it as a pretty picture for people because I'm like, it's it's going to be hard. Like, there's no part of me that thinks it's just going to be super fun. Like, we'll be in a new place every month. It'll be so great. I actually think it's probably going to be really challenging, but it's like knowing that is what I want. So you like are picking what your challenge is, but then creating systems to make it work for you. So.
What's the next project? Will it be about living in short-term rentals for a year?
I don't know. I actually just yesterday, finally, after months of going back and forth, and Seth unfortunately even knows this, like when I start writing certain things, I like kind of just go into a hole and like I don't check email, I don't check anything, and then 2 weeks later I come out, I'm like, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I do that. But I just finished a proposal for book number 2. And my agent's going to send it out tomorrow. So we'll see. I will.
What about your friendships through this whole thing? Like, who are your closest friends and how that impacted your journey?
Yeah. Okay, so friendships like throughout that year and even just now, like I talk about her a bit in the book, but my best friend Emma and I have been close for a long time, since I was probably 19. I always say now, like, everyone needs an Emma, and what I mean by that is that you need the friend who's going to enable you to make the good decision. Because I think we all have the friends you could call and be like, you're like trying to be healthy, and you're like, hey, can we just like go for drinks and pizza? And they're like, yeah, let's do that. Like, not go to the gym. Emma is the friend who's like, let's go to the gym. And then like, if you really want it after, we can go for pizza after. And so I'm always like, everyone needs an Emma. So our friendship got a lot closer, even though it's been long distance for us since I was like 25. But Emma's like my best friend. I honestly think that the more changes I make, like I was saying, you might lose some friends when you're making certain changes, but the friends that I've picked up, the things that are so different about it is that not only do you find something a bit deeper often to bond on, like I find with people now, I never sit around and like talk about the weather or talk about little things. Like we always immediately go into these like deep dive, let's share lots of secrets. and it just because it just happens, like we've created these spaces to just develop really meaningful relationships. So a lot of them are long distance, especially because I'm traveling. That's been a byproduct of blogging too. I've met a lot of great people through blogging, and a lot are in the States, like, so they're all over the place. But yeah, it's just about like creating time when you are going to speak, and again, like really knowing who the right people are to call when you're worried about something, or like even during the shopping ban. Like Emma was the kind of friend who I would think about buying the stupidest thing sometimes and just be like, I need all new bedding. Emma stopped me and she'd be like, you're fine. What is wrong with you? Like, you just, I don't know, like need a couple of people like that and you're good. Yes? I'm just really nervous to like jinx it. Like I'll tell Seth when it's good to go. If someone buys it, I just have a lot of feels of like, what if no one wants it? Then I'll feel, I don't know, but I should know in like 3 to 4 weeks. So, yes.
What do you think your parents could have done differently to keep you from getting into this?
Yeah. Part of me thinks not a lot. What I will say, actually, I'll just say some of the positives first. Things my parents used to tell me. I knew how much the house cost, what their monthly mortgage payment was, how much groceries cost, how much like cable, internet. I knew what everything cost, and I think that stuff like that is so important because I have so many friends now who never knew things like that. Like their parents never told them anything. I think, actually, I've told this to my dad. Like we talked about money so much, but if my dad had actually showed me a budget. Or the other thing is, like, I saw my parents pay for things with credit cards all the time because they used rewards, right? Like, they were trying to get rewards, but they could always pay it off. Like, if they had showed me what it looks like to pay it off in full every month rather than just be swiping, I think just, like, little things like that, if I'd just seen it. So, like, if I'd literally been able to look at, like, their online banking or a budgeting spreadsheet, even though, I probably would have had no interest in it, but like seeing actual systems that people use, because we kind of talked about it, but I never really saw things. So yeah.
Do you think, or maybe this is more mistaken, our schools could probably do better with high schoolers and so forth on things like this, as I have high school kids, that have no clue, even though we talk about things and having some kind of class or program?
Yeah, I think, again, being Canadian, smaller in scale only in that we have a fraction of the number of provinces that you guys have states, but things like the systems are different in every single province, and my guess is that would be the same in the States as well. Like, my guess is that the curriculum that's taught here isn't the same as what's taught in California. So I think that as a country, they have a hard time figuring out like what a broad thought of that would be. But yeah, my job for the first 5 years of my like career was actually working for the Ministry of Education in BC. So my job was doing the print layout for K to 12 courses. So I knew exactly actually where personal finance was laid in to things, but it's little fractions, right? Like, it's like, here's a little bit you learn in grade 8. Here's a little bit that you earn in 11th. Like, or we had one elective that you had to take, but like personal finance was just this teeny tiny portion of the whole thing. And oftentimes kids just like get their parents to do it because they're like, I don't get it. So yeah, I do think it's important. I've heard also some mixed stories, like from teachers. I've heard that there's research saying things like that kids don't understand financial concepts unless they're actually doing them. Part of me, I just question it because I'm like, cool, well, like, I didn't know anything about like physics or chemistry, but like I had to learn that stuff. But I've heard that a bunch of times from teachers, so I don't know what the right answer is. I've thought about it before. I'm like, yeah, if there was something that was like mandatory to either graduate high school with or, yeah, but I don't know what it would look like. So, yeah. No, I mean, I just do really basic, boring spreadsheets. They don't even do proper calculations. Like, I just use all the little tools within Excel, so I don't have good tips on that. I know a lot of people love YNAB, You Need a Budget. And the reason, or at least my understanding from a lot of friends, a lot of self-employed people really like YNAB because the way the budgeting system sort of works, it's like you're budgeting money based on stuff that's actually come in or like the previous month's income or like something like that. So you actually know money that you have to work with. But that's, and I know the guys who work, or like some of the guys who work there. So yeah. Yes.
Being an investor group, I have to ask, what have you done or what do you plan to do with all the money you've saved?
Yes. Yeah, of course. So our accounts are different. So like this won't make sense. But so we have two different vehicles. So we have like our RSPs, which were created years ago. It's like just registered retirement savings accounts. I think they're like 401ks, I think. We also have tax-free savings account, which I think are like IRAs. Are they tax-free-ish? Like on after? Okay. So right now, the majority of the saving that I do is I'm just trying to max out my TFSA all the time. We have an annual limit, which is why I know it's similar. Like it's like $5,500 a year. I think they might have just increased it to $6,000, or they're talking about it. So yeah, so like I'm just trying to max that out typically. But yeah, I am just saving for the future and like making sure that I, even like earning wise, I'm probably not like most people. Like for earning, I actually just care about earning the amount of money that I need. Like I don't really have these goals of like, I need 6 figures and then I need more. Like as long as I'm earning what I need to save and to live and be able to travel, then like I feel very content. So yeah. Yes.
Did your publishers book came out send you on a book tour, or have you done any kind of book tour in the United States?
I've done a little, but they don't do that for you. So it's been stuff like this, like someone like Seth reaching out and just being like, hey, you want to come? You're like, sure, let's do it. Yeah, unless you are like a massive author who sells hundreds of thousands of copies of book, like right off the bat, publishers don't really set that stuff up for you. But it's been pretty neat. Like I've done this about 16 or 17 times now in the last year, and it's been pretty neat. It's also because the actual conversations that you get to have in person feel so important, right? And like also you get to just talk like yourself. Like I'm sure some people would come up and be a motivational speaker. I'm like, I do not do that because I don't know how. But you get to like just be yourself and have real conversations, and so I really enjoy that part of it. But yeah, you've kind of got to figure out how to make it work financially yourself because they don't do a lot for that. Yeah.
Let's just give a hand for Cait Flanders.
Thanks so much. It's awesome. Yeah, it's awesome. Hey, thanks for learning with us today on the show.
We would love to meet you at one of our free monthly meetups in Middle Tennessee.
Hit the thumbs up button if you like the content. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss a thing on this channel.
Check out another awesome investing video here.